don't think the strategy has changed. I think the strategy remains the same, is to inflict pain inside Russia, inside the occupied territories, inside Crimea, to bring home the cost of occupation, the cost of war back to Russians, and impose costs on the Russian state and Russian economy. I mean, just on this e-commerce side, the e-commerce sector in Russia is massive. Because of the sort of problems of the state, people have entered into the space to allow people to trade more easily. So I read it represents maybe 8.5 to 9% of Russian gross domestic product, employs maybe 4 million people, which is 5% of the workforce. And it's been a growth sector because Russia's looking for growth. You've got the military side. The military economy is sort of full to capacity. So where do you get growth from? You try and encourage a sort of e-commerce side. So, I mean, firstly, I think it's there to dent the Russian economy, both in terms of getting taxes from these platforms. It's to retaliate by the Ukrainians retaliating against Russians targeting their own Russian-Ukrainian logistics sites over the last 4 years. I think it's there to bring home to the Russian people that there are consequences of war, and to hit these small business owners, the Russian economy, and indeed the Russian user. Lots of people, 90% of Russians who use these platforms, to bring it right home to them. So it's more difficult to fill your car up. It's now more difficult to use Wildberries to buy trousers or clothing or electronic goods. Well, I think economic warfare has always been, for me, one of the ways for Ukraine to prevail, or at least force Putin to change course. I think on the battlefield, it's been pretty static on and off for 3 or 4 years, but opening up this direct campaign against the Russian economy, I think, has proven more successful. So we've seen the issues with gas prices, rationing of gas outside capitals, the diversion of fuel to government and military vehicles, therefore also the cost of inflation, because things become more difficult, more expensive to shift around. Russia's very dependent on its road network, therefore increased prices go straight onto the customer. And I think the same thing will apply to these Wildberries. I mean, just imagine the Sun readers think if we took out Amazon was taken offline tomorrow. Imagine the damage of that to small, medium-sized enterprises. These are the people who have already been suffered in the last 4.5 years by the Russian state, focusing on big defense companies. People trying to make money, trying to make a living through buying and selling stuff, and then suddenly that's taken away. I saw a graphic today. Ukraine's now struck 5 of the top 10 Wildberry depots across Russia. There's another big one in Moscow. There's another big one in Kazan. That'll be the top 5 done, and then they'll be into the next level down. So it's obviously systematic. I think the other thing, of course, is Ukraine now has capacity to do this. We saw spectaculars in the past against Russian bombers, or a site here, a site there, but now it seems to be sustained, over and over again, repeated. And if they don't succeed the first time, they manage to attack again. So I think that's also testament to 2.5, 3 years of hard work to develop a domestic arms industry. So it's all bringing home psychologically and in people's pockets, on top of an already struggling economy, the costs of war. I think on the elections, I mean, obviously the elections are for the State Duma, the first time the parliament, the first time since the war started. And it's a time of risk for the regime, because it allows a form of dissent to be expressed about the conduct of the war. And we saw in previous elections, that some candidates could be used by the Russians to express their dissatisfaction without having to come out openly onto the streets. It's also a risk because there's also the other side of the argument. There's all the war veterans and the hawks who want to see Russia, punish Ukraine even more. So the Kremlin's going to have to sort of negotiate the elections. But I think in terms of popularity, Putin's popularity, he still remains popular, but he's less popular than he was before. But I think you're also seeing dissatisfaction about the mood about the economy in particular, and that's about people's daily lives, and that's how that will be manifested through those elections. I think they're fair to say that the Wildberries network, because it's so prevalent across Russia, can be used for the provision of dual-use goods, so civilian and military purposes. So I think Ukrainians have shown that you can buy body armor on there, you can buy electronics, you can buy navigation equipment. Other companies can buy other stuff from other people, which they can then use in military products. So I think it's a legitimate target in the Ukrainian campaign, just as oil and gas infrastructure was as well, and bridges, and ammunition dumps, and barracks, those sort of things. I think the difference between the Ukrainian approach, the Russian approach, is Russians don't care about causing civilian casualties. The Ukrainians do. I think that's why they're attacking at night or early in the morning when the people aren't there, therefore to reduce the risk of civilian casualties, to stay proportionate, as the phrase goes. I think on terms of military equipment, I mean, everybody's complaining, both on both the Russian side and the Ukrainian side, that the system isn't capable of providing what they need. And we've seen this before, in our history, the First World War, people bought kit and off the commercial market and the civilian market and military market. The military suppliers can't provide it. And that's just the way it is. Especially if you had to ramp up, as Russia has a large number of people in the field, and it needs to equip people, there's going to be shortages. And people say, well, what about first aid stuff? Or what about food? Or what about clothing? Or what waterproofs, boots, those sort of things, gloves, scarves, those things you can buy off Wildberries quite easily, at the same time as, patriotic people can buy body armor and send it to their loved ones at the front line. And what does Ukraine want to do? He wants to reduce money available for the Russian war machine. He wants to clog up the Russian logistics system. He wants to bring home the war to the political elites and also to the public. I mean, think in terms of Crimea. I mean, Ukraine's been targeting Crimea for, well, in earnest, it's 2022, but before that as well, when it was annexed by Russia illegally. And I think the plan there is to make it unviable. That's why you're seeing water shortages, lighting shortages, and also to show the decrepitude of the Russian state. The Russian state can't help Crimeans out, but having promised that this was the jewel in the Russian crown and the place of Russian glory, and look, it's being exposed as just the hollow state it is. And the Ukraine's already driven out the Russian Navy from Sevastopol. I think the idea of there in Crimea in particular is to make the price of occupation so high that it can't be sustained. I think in terms of the strikes in the battlefield in the occupied areas inside Ukraine, that is to put grit into the oyster of the Russian logistics system, to slow it up, to clog it up. It doesn't have to destroy every single truck, every single fuel bowser, or every single a convoy of equipment going into the front line. It just needs to put enough in, which means that the Russians have to divert effort to protect those, which then means there's less people available on the front line to do it. And then you have the campaign inside Russia, which is really look about oil and gas, because of the vulnerability of the Russian state to interruptions of that. They're now having to import fuel, diesel, fine fuel from India, rather than be exporting it. So it's driving down earnings, as well as clogging up the system inside Russia. And then on top of that, you now have this new campaign on Wildberries. Now the question, of course, is where else could it go? Could it go against data centers, for example? Russia has a few large data centers. If Ukraine targets that, those are probably civilian military sites as well. What about communication nodes? So I think there are clever people inside Ukraine trying to work out where's the best places to target inside Russia, which have the biggest payoff in terms of slowing the Russian war machine down, and also forcing Putin, putting dilemmas on top of Putin about the economy, about people, and finances, then to try and drive some sort of rethink about the way ahead. It's been very embarrassing, hasn't it? Putin went to that economic forum in St. Petersburg, and he opened on the day the Ukrainians hit refineries inside St. Petersburg itself. So all the attendees had this big plume of smoke over the top of them, which sort of set the scene for that big showpiece event that Putin wanted to show off Russian economic prowess. I think the problem with our air defences was, Russia has fundamentally their defences is a huge country. It can't defend everywhere. And even if it had all the air defences it needed, Putin has decided to concentrate them into Moscow because he's fearful of, the political effect of having Ukrainian strikes inside Moscow itself. and to protect himself and the regime. So they've actually allowed more gaps, as well as the Ukrainians have had more success in targeting Russian air defences systematically in Crimea and the occupied areas inside Russia itself, as well as they're routing their attacks cleverly to avoid air defences. You just fly in a direct line, you can skirt past known air defence sites. So I think it's systematic, these attacks, of a failure of Russia to be able to defend itself. I mean, having said that, Ukraine was being missiled today. Ukraine's having problems defending itself from Russian ballistic missiles. So it's a bit of to and fro, give and take. But I think the other thing is that Ukraine is going to be bringing more weapons online soon and in due course. They've promised a new ballistic missile themselves, longer range missiles to target sites across Russia, complemented by cruise missiles, complemented by drones. So if anything, I think that the trajectory of the Ukrainian campaign is upwards. Russia, at the same time, has also been increasing its own strikes into Ukraine as each side jostles for advantage. One thing about Wildberries is it's not Amazon. Wildberries is more a marketplace. This marketplace economy Russia want to set up to allow people to trade. And of course, these huge warehouses are in the places where people live and where people want to trade. So if those warehouses aren't there, or the infrastructure is not there, or the stock isn't there, then people can't trade. Therefore, it's just going to grind the whole system up. And the graphic I saw had 2025 odd Wildberry major depots, and they've been picked off, obviously, in order. Strikes me the bigger ones you hit, they have the bigger impact. That's why they're going top down rather than bottom up. I think the second thing is that even though some have been missed or barely hit, they'll be hit again to try and really drive this whole ecosystem of e-commerce into the ground. Of course, they could extend their campaign from Wildberries to Wildberries competitors as well. If you think at 8.5% of the GDP is dependent on this, even a dent of a couple of percent GDP is a lot of money. At a time, Russia's already running a deficit of, it's already incredibly expensive to borrow to fill that deficit between spending and income. Inflation's going up. There's less money in the system to sort of grease the pump. Prices are going up and the deficit's growing. So again, I think the Russian economy is in a fragile position, and anything the Russians or the Ukrainians can do to make it more fragile will have payoff in due course. I mean, I think Russia's economy has been struggling. I mean, they had a sort of sugar rush a couple of years ago, last year, with all this new defence spending. But now they can't actually spend the money they've got because the factories are running at capacity, plus the huge number of, they don't have enough people. They have a massive labour shortage. So I think the three factors are that defence spending keeps going up, and not just spending direct, but on social costs and pensions and all those other things. Sanctions are going up because you just passed another big package yesterday. So America's putting more tariffs on. So that's also the situation there is worsening. And also finally, Ukrainian strikes are going up, therefore the situation is worsening as well. So again, economic warfare, which the British pioneered in both wars, strikes me as a way to make Putin think, that place more and more dilemmas on him about lack of people, lack of industrial capacity, lack of money, the public mood and the risks of said about the elections, and then make him choose about whether to settle, whether to continue on, or whether he'll escalate. And of course, if he escalates and mobilizes fully, that will also have societal impact. So I think, I don't think it's a new phase. I think Ukraine's been trying this. It's actually finally perhaps coming to fruition.